All right. Well, welcome everybody online as well as those of us here in the room. And we are just delighted to have less than triple digits in the weather. And it really energized me this morning. So I hope everybody's enjoying that like I am. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll officially call the meeting of the CAC to order for the September 13th meeting. And I guess we need to start with our roll calls.
Here.
Well, Diana Martinez.
Here.
Frank Gonzalez. Raquel Zapata. Adelita Cantu. John Kelly.
Here.
Tom Corser.
Here.
Vanessa Alvarado. Bill Day. Steve
Here.
Bonet.
Here.
Andrew Campbell.
Here.
Bob Zapata.
Here.
And Aaron Stein.
Here.
Great. All right. Very good. We'll now do our invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. It's going to do that for us today. Okay.
All right, everyone, please join me for today's invocation. We are thankful for this day that you have given us, for its blessings, its opportunities, its challenges. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing important responsibilities. We ask that you guide our thoughts and our actions so that we may have a successful meeting of the CPS Energy Citizens Advisory Committee. Help us to accomplish our goals while displaying your character. Help us to do good, to be honest, to serve others, and to fulfill our obligations to our community. We pray these in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Now, if everyone will join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope everybody had a chance to review the minutes from our August meeting, and at this time I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
So moved. Second.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
So we had a first from
Richard.
Richard,
second
and
from
second
Mr.
from
Bonnet.
Steve.
All right.
Okay. All right. Okay, and now I believe our next item on the agenda is the financial.
You didn't take the vote, they did the motion.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I skipped that little formality. Okay, let's vote on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Yvonne, for keeping me on Robert's Rules of Order.
That's all right.
All right, so our next item on the agenda is the financial performance update. And
I'll cue that up for us.
okay.
So Melissa's going to go ahead and cue up our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Corey Kuczynski, who's going to give you a quarterly financial status update. This presentation was given to our Board of Trustees at their August 31st meeting just 2 weeks ago. We provide a financial update to the board on a quarterly basis. And I felt that it'd been a while, since we've had a financial related topic, in front of the Citizens Advisory Committee. So I thought it would be a good foundational piece, especially as we are contemplating, moving forward with a rate request in the future. I thought it would be a good foundational piece to just get the committee acclimated, if you will, to the organization's financial performance. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Kuczynski, who will be presenting to the committee today via Microsoft Teams.
So this is through June, right?
This is July 31st.
July 31st, okay.
All right. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you guys can hear and see me.
Yes, we can.
We can.
Awesome. All right. Well, Yvonne did a great tee up for me. So I'll hit some of these slides and go through them. And it'll be a very similar message that we had during the board meeting. But as we look at the agenda, I'll hit kind of the second quarter financial performance. I'm still going to talk about some of the cost pressures that we're seeing, and then kind of close out with what it all means, big picture for us financial results. I'll get the next slide. So the main takeaway halfway through the year is that the financial performance looks pretty good, and we'll kind of break that up into two parts. We'll look at the revenue side of what we've been seeing this year, and then we'll talk about the cost side. And kind of the general theme you'll hear me talk about is we're seeing better than expected performance on the revenue side, which is kind of masking over some of the cost pressures that we are seeing. So kind of unpack both sides of it as we go forward. What we've done halfway through the year is revise our kind of year-end forecast, which we've talked about very briefly at the last board meeting, but we've updated both on the revenue and the expense side, and you kind of see some of the highlights on the bottom of this slide where we've made changes. But I'll break some of that down here in the following slides. Okay, so we can go on to the next one. Here's an example of some of the kind of key pieces of equipment and materials that our teams use for day-to-day activities. I called this one out for our board at the past meeting, and I'm calling it out again because it really stands out. These comparisons are just year over year, which, you know, if we all recall, last year saw inflationary pressures. What this is really demonstrating is that we haven't seen any let up as we have gone through this year in terms of supply chain and inflation kind of compounding. And the stuff at the very top, new meters. This is for like setting up our new customers. We're looking at 25,000 new customers a year for the last 2 or 3, just because of the high growth we've had. Those are highs for us. And you can see the cost per unit's going up for those. Transformers, been all over headlines, all different kinds of transformers. Those costs are probably accelerating the quickest out of all the items that you know, that we purchase. Reclosers is another big piece of equipment that we actually talked about 2 years ago. This is really great for reliability. Operational folks can explain it better, but this helps break our system up into smaller chunks to help manage the number of customers that are out at a given time. So that's an investment we want to keep up. So these are just some of the items that are kind of embedded in some of the cost numbers that we'll see, and we'll keep talking about this on the back half of the year. But this is the first time we've taken an opportunity with our board and with you as well to kind of show some of those key things that from a headline perspective are kind of relatable and kind of what that's doing. But the next slide kind of gives us a big picture.
Good question. Sorry to interrupt, but the transformer increase is so tremendous. What's really driving that? Where are they sourced within the U.S. or do they have overseas components?
I don't remember the component parts, but I do know that our supply chain folks have been looking both in the U.S. and I believe in Mexico as well. But let me take that as a follow-up for you to get a little bit more detail from that perspective.
Okay.
I was wondering, is it copper? I mean, copper's come down, but I don't know. It's worth understanding.
Yeah.
But the driver on transformers has been a supply chain issue and accessibility compounded by acceleration and growth. And those two things have worked together to drive this up.
So Corey, this is Tom. Thanks for being here. You know, I understand how supply line impacts that transformer price, right? Supply demand, that whole bit. But in all these instances, how do you forecast, not for 24, but for 25, 26, in terms of, you know, we've been through a pretty significant inflationary time. And this is somewhat reflective of that. Do you expect that we're going to have negative unit price decreases in the future to correct, or you think it's more a bump due to inflation and sustaining those pricing?
In the near term, Tom, the next 6 to 18 months, I mean, it would be at best case, I would say flat. But we're still seeing, I'm not seeing a downward view of it yet. And I think that is why I'm calling this out, because you're not seeing the come down on that quite yet. And there's backlogs on some of these transformers for over a year. So to your point, if it's just driven by that supply demand element of it, you've got to work through the backlogs before you start seeing the come off in price. So we've baked in our future forecast a sustained level for at least the next couple of years.
And I know that, is it all right if I ask a question?
You bet.
So this is Bob Zapata. So with respect to the transformers, and they cover the wide spectrum, whether it's residential, commercial, et cetera, you're seeing this across the board on everything?
Sorry to switch the audio there. Can you guys hear me now still?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What was the question?
Yeah, the question I have is, it's a general category transformers, but is it residential? Is it the commercial aspect of it? Or these big substations? I guess, is it just all across the board where you're seeing these price increases and the supply chain challenges?
It is. It's across the board, and we can separately follow up on specifics, but it's across the board.
You got Siemens, you got GE, you got all these guys. It's crazy.
I've heard
isn't it?
this before. It's
crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a whole, and we could probably do a separate follow-up, Yvonne, on just supply chain generally, and kind of focus on that. But if that's an area where, if there's more discussion wanted, we can absolutely dive into that.
Corey, I've captured that as a follow-up, but I just wanted, for context, I want the committee to know, and you can validate my statement, but last year, if I'm not mistaken, there was at the federal level, the pursuit of the Defense Production Act to utilize the Defense Production Act to generate transformers, just like it was used at the beginning of the pandemic to generate respirators.
Really? There's some regulatory rule to make sure the domestic production, or,
Wow,
it just seems really odd. I mean, we need to.
So this transformer issue is all across the United
It's not a
States.
CPS
No
issue.
kidding. Wow.
We're all fighting for the same thing.
Yeah, we're not unique in this regard at all. And we're not unique in a lot of items, whether it be new meters, whether it be transformers. These critical items are being seen throughout the country, all utilities, same issue.
The only unique
We
thing is we have you.
Missed that. So funny.
right,
Well, I'll go
Corey.
to the next slide. We're okay. The next slide is just kind of our standard view of net income. This is the year-to-date actual. I'll call out one thing on this slide because the next slide I have is actually, I think, more informative. But one thing that we've seen trending for this whole year is the story around fuel cost. Last year, the story was about natural gas prices being high, greatly impacted by the war in Ukraine. This year, you've seen the price come back down. And so you can see our fuel costs are significantly below where we had planned, which, as you guys recall, the fuel is a pass-through. So we pay $1 for fuel. I charge my customer $1 for fuel. So as that comes down, the benefit is directly to our customers. And so they're seeing lower bills year over year, primarily driven by fuel cost adjustment on the bill. See it manifest through here. One thing that does stand out, which I'll show on the next slide, is the net income. Our plan was to forecast just about 10 million, almost 11 million negative. And you can see we have a big pop year to date in actual. And I think the bigger story, which I'll probably spend the most time on the next slide, this is pretty informative. It's pretty easy to read, walk forward on slides.
So Corey, just to understand that last chart, sorry, Melissa, thank you. You're forecasting, in other words, your variance with regard to FY 2024 plan is you're forecasting a net income of 93, is that right?
Not forecasting, this is a year-to-date actual. So at the 6-month view.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
So our forecast, which I have, is in the board presentation, which I could toggle back to. It still is higher than planned. So it's kind of same message.
All right, so is that, how do we think about that with respect to what happened at the end of last year with this whole surplus of 75 million? Is there equivalency here?
Different. We'll back up to that. We didn't have a surplus. the city had a surplus. And so the city's making was around their surplus, which was a function of payment being high, which was a function of our fuel expense being so much higher that we put city payment on top of the fuel expense. They got more money because the cost of fuel we were passing
So
through.
I understand the pass-through, but wouldn't the same thing happen here? At 24% of the 93 would pass through above the plan that the city would have from CPS?
It would for opposite reasons. What's uncertain, because we're only halfway through the year,
Understood.
is city payment is, if you look at the forecast on that slide, significantly, looking at fuel rather, fuel is significantly less from an actual perspective, almost $250 million below plan. So when we shared our forecast with the city, they assumed they were getting 14% on an extra $250 million this year, which did not show up. Right, so their city payment goes down. It's offset by the other drivers of revenue, which I'll speak to in a minute, which were not planned. And so the net effect is what the city will be tracking all year long. And we're at that inflection point where some of this stuff is starting to manifest, and they'll be having those conversations, which I think they did yesterday, actually, their city council. But you're not looking at 50 million right now. Because the main driver pressing down city payment is the fuel forecast.
Got it.
Really
Okay.
cratering.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Good question. Okay, so the next slide, I'll walk through this. This really takes you from left. You see that negative 10.7 that you'd seen on the previous slide, and it walks you all the way through to our actual year to date for end of July of 82.3. I won't step through everything, but the first two that jump off going left to right is the higher electric sales. Now this is driven truly by usage, and this is, as we've all been experiencing, a super hot summer, 60 plus days over 100, and not only has it been over 100, it's been higher in the hundreds. Right, we've been setting records above and beyond even previous years. So that's created a lift in revenue for the 6 months of about 25 million. What's an interesting kind of corresponding story right next to that, it says lower age receivables. This is a super great story. This basically means we had estimated, our bad debt expense for the year to be a number. It was close to $30 million, which was still high historically speaking, but less than last year. We're actually seeing better performance. People are being more current on their bill this year than we anticipated. Which is a lift to revenue, right? Because it's being offset by bad debt expense. It's a great story, and it's actually very complementary to the story that you hear Deanna talk about how our total past due accounts have been coming down since October. We peaked at 208. We're down to 171 million. So you're seeing a lot of positive trends, both from people paying their back bills and people staying more current, which is positive, and we're still seeing that trend hold through the early parts of the summer. We're in September. We're going to see how customers hold up through the back end of the summer, but that's a really great story, and I call that out the board. I'm just calling it out again here. We'll keep an eye on that. Probably the next big story is that column that says favorable market conditions, but below you can see it says net wholesale revenue. We didn't talk much about wholesale revenue last year because it was a non-story. Wholesale revenue, which many of you may be familiar, is simply to the extent we've got excess generation that our community doesn't, because we're already serving it, we sell into the market, i.e. selling it into ERCOT. Last year we had some power plant issues and our community needed it, and our wholesale sales were half, 50% of our target. So it was actually a drag on performance last year. This year's the flip. This year we have had all of our plants, knock on wood, running all through the summer. Conditions this summer were even tighter, which you guys have seen, and ERCOT has sent a lot of kind of notifications beginning at the end of July through August, which has caused higher prices while our plants are available
during these specific hours in the late evening when solar's coming off, but the house is still hot and folks still need to cool. So what that means is, from a drop-down perspective, this net wholesale revenue shows $32 million year to date in revenue basically generated from the state of Texas. So that's beneficial for us, and it's helping, cover some of the additional expenses that we're seeing. Those are probably the big headline stories that folks will talk about because they're the biggest numbers. There's other smaller things in there that have been positive for us that, and I said this at the board meeting, it's rare to have lift in both streams of revenue and kind of non-core revenue lift. But you can see a few columns over, we have higher investment income. This has just been a function of, even though we invest conservatively, our rates on our savings accounts, the fixed income investments, even though they're shorter term that we've been investing in, have a higher interest rate. We've seen interest income about $10 million higher than our forecast, which is positive. And then conversely, on the far right, kind of the last one I'll call out, you see lower interest rates. We continue to be able to go out to the market and issue debt and borrow for less than we forecast, which we still forecast pretty low because we're a great credit. We're seeing about $3 million savings in our overall interest expense for the year, which will be in perpetuity. So you really have a strong story on the revenue side, and you can't get away from it. So I spent time at the board meeting walking through this slide, and hopefully that shines some light. The net takeaway is we got to follow all of this and see how the year finishes out. We're only halfway through the year, but we'll be reforecasting as we kind of get our results through August and September.
So Corey, I agree. This is a fantastic chart. When we look at that favorable market condition, right, slide, and we see such a distinct difference than plan, right? Does that suggest that we as CPS are significantly a net contributor to the grid versus a user of the grid? Do you see what I mean when I say?
Sure. Yeah. I will say, I wouldn't say the word significant. I would say a net contributor.
A net,
if that makes sense.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is, we were at a community event where some folks that were, I would say, posturing as anti-CPS folks were suggesting that, why do you keep sending out all these notifications for us to cut back when we have ample capacity? So half of their argument, I would argue, is true, that we as CPS, for the purpose of supplying our residents, we have adequate capacity. And now we contribute to a grid, and we use off of that grid, and we follow the procedures of notifying people when the grid needs to go down. We're a community player in that regard, right? So I guess my question to you is, how do I talk to a citizen, a ratepayer of CPS, that says, hey, we're paying rates to invest in power plants, invest in infrastructure, do the right thing, pay Yvonne's salary, do all these things necessary to make CPS fly, right? But yet we're contributing more than we're taking, right? And our rates maybe are, one could argue, I would debate this, but a little bit higher than anybody else who's not contributing, who's using the energy we're creating. How do I respond to that? And maybe the Bernie Etheridge question, I don't know, but I'm giving you a shot.
Yeah, well, I think it's a blend. So I'll give you it in pieces, and then I'll defer the rest. But I mean, the first comment about rates, you're still paying the lowest rates in Texas. Between us and Austin, and we've moved lower. That's kind of point one. Point two is you can be long relative to the city of San Antonio, but if the state is still short, you're still rotating anyways. You're gonna have an outage.
I understand.
So that's why I talk to my community. Like, yeah, it's the market conditions. Like we as a community don't want to plan to be even, right? You want a little bit of cushion. So we always plan a little bit of generation cushion. It's that cushion to take advantage of those prices that just happen to spike in those few hours. But it wouldn't be prudent for us to try and manage it that exact. Be number one, and number two, like I said, you can be long all day long, but if the state is short, then you're still going to be in rotating outage.
Yeah, and
Benny could probably give more context to that.
Yeah, and it's really the calibration of the long that's critical. Because if you go long, significantly long, let's say, whatever that is, right? But significantly long in terms of that overcapacity, right? You're really not protecting us. You're protecting the grid, right?
And
Because,
that's not the case. We're talking a few hundred megawatts, maybe 500, and depends on if you're able to save it. We're not talking about 2 power plants worth of excess generation. That's why
what I'm trying to get a sense of is there a net kind of investment that we're making that realize those favorable conditions of 32.4 million that how should I say, unfairly, I'm not saying this is a slam at all, I'm just trying to reflect some people out there that are asking me questions, and that is that putting more rate on us, even though we're cheap, one of the cheapest ratepayers, but could we even go lower on our rates if we didn't provide that excess capacity? I'm looking for the response to that.
Look, I'd say, look, no to that, but look at some data facts. If I was having this conversation with you last year, I would have been negative 20 million, right? Because I didn't have the right thing. I had an outage. We weren't able to take advantage. The market didn't have the condition that way. Second, we had a conversation about generation planning over this whole past year that our board approved in January. And embedded in that very transparent conversation was about how we plan for the future, what the appropriate reserve margins for the community are, and it's all very industry standard. So to the extent you build less and want less of a cushion, you're talking about changing a standard, but all of it's transparent. So you don't build like 1 megawatt at a time. You build big chunks, and that's what our gen plan is. The last is this is highly variable. If you look through the history of wholesale sales, we may have a target of $50 million net of fuel, but some years it's 20, some years it's 100. It is truly hard to predict, and it's weather driven and it's state driven. If there are outages across the state that were unanticipated, it creates the supply demand issue that you just may have run your plants like normal, but now there's a constraint and the prices are high. And you happen to have 100 megawatts.
So the key is.
So that's why I think it's tough.
I'm sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, I just said it's tough to pin it down because this is highly volatile. And what we get as a community is when this does happen, we get the benefit collectively, but you're still getting the most affordable rates. And what we're doing is pretty standard from a planning perspective.
Yep. Got it. Thank you. Great answer. Thank you, Corey.
All right.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Man, I'm talking to you, Tom.
Corey, this is Steve Barnett, and my question is, you put a very positive spin on the lower age receivables that's above what you all had budgeted this year. But at the same time, you mentioned that there's still 171 million, I think if I wrote that down correctly, of receivables out there. If I recall correctly, you're reading about this month's board meeting that you got some grief from the board members about the balance on that. It's still so high and it still needs to come down. I think the understood concern in there is going back to the city of San Antonio asking for a rate increase with that large balance of receivables. So how is the and again, thinking of how we relate this to the public, how is the staff taking that moving forward? Are you making any adjustments or different approaches to this or what?
Yeah, so 2 points on that. There's kind of 2 things. To start with, it is positive, and it's been 3 years of building up, and we started in October of last year in earnest to bring it down. So the acceleration from October to now is pretty rapid. So I do feel positive about it. That's number one. Number two is what we've done. Our teams do everything from making phone calls to block walking to getting folks on an installment plan. And of that balance, that 172 million, it was in at the board meeting. So I think approximately 80 million or so, could be more, are on installment plans. And that is a huge sub headline that people don't flag. So while there's a huge amount to do, what I've told the rating agencies, and they like this, is you've got a substantial amount on installment plans. And how do you know they're holding? Well, right now we have a 60% take rate, but what you're seeing that through to is more customers are staying current, which I showed on that slide. So it's all trending in the right direction. Furthermore, we have gone back to our regular disconnect process, except for the summer when it's been hot, we can't do that. But we're in pre-pandemic pace, which, it's just a fact, all utilities are back at. So I think we've got a lot of momentum. The last point going forward is just as we're still refining our forecast for the rate request, and to the extent we feel that we need some support, we'll speak to it. To the extent we feel like we've got a really good trend and we want to see how the Zephyr plays out, we'll do that too. But the real measure is going to be those 3 financial metrics at the end of this presentation that measure financial health to tell you whether we have the luxury of being able to be deliberate we are or not.
So let me go ahead and pause here, doing a time check. We are at 5 minutes left. Nancy, was there something from Gabriel Garcia, a member of our legal counsel, also had a point that he wanted to make?
Yes.
Can you get closer to the microphone,
Sure,
maybe?
absolutely. A response provided by Mr. Gabriel Garcia was to Tom's question. Answers for consideration: 1, conservation is voluntary for retail customers. 2, conservation allows CPS Energy to sell surplus power to ERCOT to make additional revenue to help keep retail rates lower. And 3, pressure for conservation is effective with additional investments in renewable energy. As Corey explained, solar energy decreases in the evening while peak continues. And we'll put it on the board.
I think that's great. And just to follow that up, right? My questions were pointed at advising us how to answer that question, not my opinion. But yeah, thank you very much.
Well, we appreciate that because that is all the buzz, right? So
Well, and it's all our purpose.
that's exactly right.
Mhm.
So we'll go with Chair Kelly's comment, and Corey, we have 5 minutes left, so we'll have to kind of pivot a little bit, but let's go with Chair Kelly's question and comment.
Well, I think I just have a general comment, Corey, is that, I see the fact that we are a municipal utility as a huge advantage for our citizens and our community, because we don't have to fight with investors over every week or every month's return on investment and so forth. We can take a little longer view on things. I think we're smart to have a cushion. I think that to the extent they're able to sell some surplus into the grid, I think that's a good thing. Obviously, we don't want to overdo it, but I think that, as you pointed out, since the vagaries of a year-to-year projection are so high, it's so hard and so dependent on outside sources or influences that we don't have any control over, like what happens in the international market for gas prices, and, just things that we can't control. I think we're doing a great job, in my opinion, and I think we've got a good story to tell there, in my opinion. But I think that's really it. I just wanted to say that I think that as we reach out to citizens who ask questions, I think we should, posit these positives or advantages that we have by being a municipal utility.
Appreciate that. Yeah, spot on. There's a lot of advantages to our business model. I speak the gospel every day.
Okay. All right.
Well, very good. Well, on that note, I'll just go to the last slide, Yvonne, and then we can wrap up. And then I'll just kind of land the final point, like slide 8. Oh, actually, maybe I meant slide 8, and I'll take some of those. I think we answered a lot of questions, but here's where it all kind of comes to fruition. What we did do, to your point, we reforecasted our end of year position. What you see is an incremental benefit to our year-end financial health. Probably the one to call out the most is that middle that says debt capitalization ratio. This is effectively, again, focused on our borrowing and our debt. What this additional revenue is able to do for us means that we can borrow less for the balance of the year and use some of that revenue to fund some of these expenses. And to your point, being the business model that we have, we don't have investors wanting to siphon off every dollar or a little bit extra over forecast. We're able to reinvest in the community and shore our financials up and so forth. So to the extent we can position ourselves a little bit better from a balance sheet perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Still have adequate days cash on hand. And that positions us well because next decade, it's a heavy, heavy time of investment. Board just approved a generation plan that over the next 10 plus years, nominally has about $14 billion of them to be made. Our IT systems that we keep talking about, well, the last rate request, we only funded the first 2 years because we were still in our planning phases. The remaining amount of the estimated $300 million also needs to be laid in. That's going to mean a lot of borrowing and a lot of pressure on our balance sheet. So right now, halfway through the year with the numbers we have, these were the tweaks we put to our forecasts. But again, these are one-time list in revenue, and this is how we applied that from a forecast perspective. So anyways, I'll end there. I think a lot of good questions were asked. There'll be more conversations that I'll be having with the board month after month. So I'm happy to come back on whenever to talk to the group.
Thank you, Corey. That would be absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Appreciate your time. It was informative, I think, for all of us on the committee. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, absolutely. I appreciate all the questions. Thanks so much, Randy.
All right, Corey, thank you so
Corey.
much.
You bet. Bye-bye. Take care.
You as well. Bye-bye. So now you can kind of get a taste for when I was listening to this at the board meeting. I said, I think it's been a while since we've had this kind of conversation. I thought it would be good for the group. So
my comment on this presentation is not so much to Corey as much as to us.
Mm-hmm.
We got to be really careful about what's being teed up with this special committee thing, right? With a lot of people are calling it a rate increase.
Yeah, true.
I know some people call it a rate adjustment, which is the right language, right? But I said this at the last 2 years ago when we did the rate increase. It was an increase, right? And I acknowledged it and I supported it, right? But I think that's the wrong language to use, right? We don't have to increase it every time. We are a public entity, right? And to the extent, that's why I was pushing on the financials and what it means about positive or negative, right? If it's a positive outcome, right, got to give it back because we're a public entity. Now, we've got to invest, right? And what he said at the end, what John was making a point, is we can take those returns and invest them, right? A good thing. But to the extent we can invest and return to the ratepayers, to the extent we can give a penny back in rate, right? We should, because ultimately, we're a public utility. Ultimately, we're trying to balance that investment and profit and loss such that we give value to customers, right? And in this inflationary period, right, we had to, prices increase, right? I'm sorry, I'm lecturing, but it's important that we acknowledge that public entity part of it, right? And we have a responsibility here to represent the optics, right, of what's said by CPS. And I'm just warning that CPS has really got to be disciplined and careful about any rate increase. That's
You're
not
reminding us that we have a devil's advocate role in some of this.
Well, and a vision of a consumer business that's consuming CPS.
Right.
So two things. Chair Kelly, you are now transitioning to committee roundtable
Okay.
until 12:30, 12:35. One thing that I do want to remind everyone about for context purposes is the bill credit that was given to CPS Energy customers in the December-ish timeframe. That was a decision by the city of San Antonio.
I understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
City,
we do
yeah,
not
city.
drive that, right?
Mhm.
Because they get the revenues from us, and after
Right.
that, we're like, okay, they decide what they do.
Right.
But, I just want to remind everyone that is a decision that our owner and regulator, that they make.
Right. But I think the bottom line is that net income does get transferred above and beyond to the city, right? So that's
At 24%.
At 24%, right? So
Well,
that,
up to
they do whatever they want.
14% is what we said.
It's a 14.
Up to
It's
14%.
14.
Yeah, every month.
Okay.
Oh, it's 14%.
Up to
Yeah, it's
14%.
14.
I'm sorry, I had that number wrong. Pardon me.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay, Chair Kelly.
Okay, yeah, there's just been as Steve and I were talking about earlier, there's just been a tremendous amount of information in the media about power and power generation and power usage and everything, and we've had, I don't know, I think one thing that kind of upset me, we've been asked to conserve to save the grid, because unlike CPS Energy, a lot of other parts of the state don't have enough generation capacity or enough really to satisfy their needs. At least they seem not to. And I guess apparently we've got some transmission line deficiencies also that are creating a problem. So anyway, I mean, that's all well and good to encourage conservation. That's fine. That seems to work. But to me, that's not a long-term solution. I mean, I think long-term, we need to have enough sufficient capacity for a rapidly growing state that's going to have additional power needs. One thing that just drove me crazy was the fact that the grid, somebody, I guess it was ERCOT, paid one of these crypto miners $31 million to shut down at the peak need. That's insane. Why are we in a situation where we should have to deal with those people? That's, I don't know, crypto mines just are insane to me. So anyway, that's just something that concerned me, but I'm open to any other thoughts. Richard, I think you had, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You had mentioned earlier that you wanted to bring up some topic in our general discussions.
Well, I wanted to bring up the dissolution of the RAC. When that was shared, I think it was 2 months ago, that was shared by Shanna.
Shannon Ramirez.
Shanna. That was news to me. I think it was a little bit of a surprise to the RAC itself as well. And with the rate adjustment that's being discussed for early next year, I know that it was a contentious board meeting from what I understood. I have full confession, I've never been to a CPS Energy board meeting. I was trying to make it to the one on the 31st, but I couldn't because of work. There's an ad hoc committee that's been created. They're going to meet, I think, 3 times, if that's correct. And there are members of the RAC, a few of them, including Adelita, who I know is not on this meeting today, who has been asked to serve on the ad hoc group, as well as a friend of mine, Didi Belmaris, who works for Public Citizen and has been asked to come back. And I've talked to Didi a lot over my time on CAC, and she has a reputation for being a very vocal critic. But I share her concern that why did the CPS board decide to dissolve the RAC right as we're starting discussion of another rate adjustment? Why create an ad hoc committee when you already had one that was in existence, that had already done the time, learned what they needed to learn, understood that process? And it's not our place in a way to recommend that committee come back. But one of the discussion points that Didi has brought up with some members of council, and I'm trying to talk to my new councilman about it, because now you and I have switched, because now I'm in District 9, but I'm still officially representing District 1 until the CAC is reformed and all that. But one of the discussion points that, and I want to give credit to her and also recognize that she's the one who's done the groundwork on it. But the idea is is to suggest an independent consumer advocate for CPS Energy. Austin Energy went that route 2 years ago. She shared some of that information with me. I've done some reading on it. It's been a successful model for Austin Energy. They're a municipal utility. One of the examples is that Austin Energy had wanted to take the 5-tier structure for energy usage. You know, it's a different rate depending on how much you use. They wanted to take that 5-tier structure down to 3-tier, and the independent consumer advocate recommended maybe that's not the best for some people on the lower income levels. And the resolution was that they went through a 4-tier structure. They found a middle ground. And so whether the city were to pay for this independent consumer advocate, or whether CPS were to pay for it, whoever were to pay for it, I like the idea of that. And I don't know whether that's something that we would like to discuss. I certainly don't. I'm not asking for a vote on it, but I think it's worth discussion in terms of a long-term potential solution.
You said advocate, singular. Is that a person or is it an organization? How does
I believe it's a person that works for an organization that does this sort of work.
I see.
Almost like a consultant.
Oh,
Yeah,
I see.
I have to double check that, but I believe that's what it was.
I'm just not familiar with it. So.
Yeah, that's,
But in
well,
that
it's,
case, the city hired an organization,
Correct.
and the organization, appointed this one person that would be the full-time
Right.
advocate for the city.
Yeah.
But I guess
And I could be wrong there. It could be a person who had a history of this who is independent. I have to admit, I don't recall that piece.
But with respect to Austin, how are they structured? Do they have a rate committee as well as like a CAC, or any idea what they're?
I've looked into it a while back. I think they have something similar. Again,
Okay.
I don't want to speculate.
Okay.
I think they have something similar, but I can't recall at the moment. So I don't know what interest this group has on trying to explore that as a point of discussion, to ask for additional thoughts from other people outside. But I, personally, as a ratepayer, I like the idea. I mean, I think you have to hold public entities' feet to the fire. It doesn't mean that the public entity is in any way doing anything bad. It just means it serves the public.
So, yeah, so I think that's personally, right? I think that is something we could discuss and kind of maybe develop a consensus on, but ultimately that's what Shannon is working. Shanna, thank you. Shanna is working with the board on developing role, right? So it seems that advocacy has to go through Shanna into the board to say, hey, this is the right posture, right, to represent public opinion, because what they're going to decide, I don't know what their schedule is. I think it's like May or something of 24 where they'll come out with that.
I thought it was February or March.
Maybe it is, I don't know. But I'm sure she's on some sort of calendar work with the board to kind of come out with the new
I thought
formulation.
the target was
But it seems that's where
No
that
later than, no
advocacy has
later
to
than the
go.
end of May.
What's
Yeah,
that?
No later than the end of May.
No later than
I
this
see.
May.
Okay. Anyway,
I
that would be
agree.
my.
I agree in a way. That's why I say it's not our place, perhaps, but I do believe that we could explore the possibility of a resolution.
Yeah.
If we explored it, that we could get behind that or not get behind it.
Yep.
I think it's worth looking into more. But that was my
I would
suggestion.
agree with that. I think it's definitely a topic that's worth exploring and maybe getting a little more detail. Maybe you could help us do a little more detail on the Austin Energy situation.
Absolutely.
And bring that back to us, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't continue to have a discussion about it. I don't know, I'd have to think through it. I don't have an instant response as to how I feel about it, but, the other kind of unknown from my perspective is the fact that since we are looking at transitioning to a little modification to what the CAC's role is and how we interact with the board and the community and so forth, since that's sort of unknown at this point, how that's going to change and how it may not be too significant. It could be more significant. We just don't know at this point. We got to work that through with the board. But so not knowing for sure how the revised CAC is going to look, I'd have to sort of think about
That makes
you know,
sense.
how do we factor in an advocate and the revised CAC? Or maybe do we revise the CAC first and then see if we still feel like we need an advocate?
I think you run out of calendar real quick.
Yeah.
Because if it's the end of May at the latest, right? That means they've pretty much decided what the CAC will be like, probably February-ish, because they got to go through all the bylaws revisions and all that stuff, such that they land in May with a polished final
product.
bow in the tie and all that stuff, right? So, you know, time is kind of running out to get involved in those discussions so you can influence the outcome.
Right.
That's going to happen, let's just say January, February.
Right. But since many of us also connect with city council members,
Correct.
not everybody, because some are at large, it might be worth having a discussion.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. But my point is that calendar's got to be quick.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
those discussions are going on now.
Yeah.
The only time to get that opinion in there is now, is my point.
Right. I agree. So I'm happy to do a little bit more research, find out more information.
Sure.
If this group thinks it's worth pursuing for future discussion.
Sure. I think it's worthy of further discussion.
The rate
My opinion,
adjustment's
what do
gonna be
y'all
at the
think?
beginning of the year, right?
What's that?
The rate adjustment, I think they're saying is the beginning of the year,
No, it's October.
October. Oh, okay.
But
No,
in
if we
parallel,
would do a rate adjustment, it would go, if we do one and it's approved, it would go into effect next year.
correct,
Okay,
but
but
the,
it'll go into effect next year, right?
but the ad hoc committee acts in October.
The ad hoc committee is
Yeah,
meeting
we'd
3
make
times
that
in October.
Determination, so
Right.
it may be just on a timing basis.
But I think we think of them as two independent tracks, right?
Okay.
They're not coupled.
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
I think that's
They're
right.
independent tracks.
Okay.
Because the need for the rate adjustment really is more urgent than revising the CAC's rule.
Right.
Is the ad hoc, it's not a sanctioned committee, it's an ad hoc committee, right?
It's sanctioned
It's sanctioned by the
Sanctioned?
board.
It is
The board discussed it and voted on it, I believe, at the August
Okay.
meeting.
Yeah,
And
19 members were appointed.
Oh, okay.
I think,
Myself and a few others from the CAC are on there, and then also from the RAC, there's some people there.
Okay.
So there's people that have been involved in the discussion.
right.
You know,
And I appreciate that.
You know, I share the question in my mind, since we're headed toward the rate
Right.
adjustment, why not leave the RAC in place till that's carried through? But
Right.
nonetheless, that's already.
Yeah.
decision.
The decision's done, but I think, I mean, and the consumer advocate idea is more of a long-term.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
it's not just because of this one adjustment.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more of a long-term, I mean, if the goal is to, as there hadn't been an increase in 8 years, and then there was this plan, as we talked about a lot last year and the year before, about
Yeah.
where the goal is to keep doing regular steps. And like we talked about, keep those steps in, so you're not having to go back and do a major adjustment after so many years.
Right.
But I think that's worth looking at,
Yeah.
you know.
My only hesitation or comment on that is that singularity, right? Of a person, even though they work for an organization that's behind them,
Mhm.
that understand that advocacy part of it,
Mhm.
right? I worry about one voice,
Yeah.
right? And, you know, a consultant's great, but it's a consultant,
A
right?
consultant.
And so, you know, that's probably the reason this is formed as a committee, right? Because, you know, you're a lot smarter than I am and you can figure out things
I don't know
different than I
about
can. And, you know, Steve is even smarter than both of us put together and all that stuff, right? So we can play off each other and kind of come to some consensus, right? Which
But
kind of
that's
has a
great.
reflection of a community versus a single person, you know.
And I'm not
Sure.
suggesting to eliminate anything. And I still like the idea of standing groups, whether it's whatever the new CAC looks like or whether there's a new, but you have a full-time person who's dedicated to doing that work.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
advising the groups that make the decision, make
Right.
recommendations,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah,
It's
that
not
part of
the-
it makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
and Tom, I guess that really was why I was thinking the timing on the advocate issue could be done later and not be coincident with the revisions to the CAC. Was my,
I see that, I understand.
I mean.
So to complement whatever they come out with.
It could come later after we kind of see how the revisions.
How it
Sure,
settles, how it
Sure.
settles. That makes some sense too.
I mean, it's just, there's different, you know, you can do it either way, but, you
Right.
know, I mean, I guess I was looking at doing it that way.
Mhm.
Well, thanks for the time.
Sure.
And I'll continue to do some research.
Yeah, I think it's worth, like I say, let's bring the topic back in our general discussion. And you have a little more detailed information. Steve?
Yeah, you kind of started this a little while ago with your comments, John, but you know, one of the good things about all the heat spell that we went through in the summer is it brought out a lot of discussion in the media about infrastructure issues with ERCOT and you know, with all of the strains we had on the grid, and ERCOT sending out once or twice a week messages for everybody to conserve. It seemed like just a couple of weeks ago, I guess the question everybody was asking, what's really causing this? Is it the usual, you know, gas plant problems, coal plant problems? And then they said, no, it's transmission issues.
Right.
We have a lack of good transmission, and they specifically said in the South Texas area.
Yeah.
Say, so the question is, does that also include the CPS area? Were we included in saying that we had inadequate transmission issue? I guess to before I get into this, I guess most of these questions are types of questions that we would get from Benny, I guess, if he came and brought us up to date on that. The other thing is that came up was inadequate battery storage. You know, as we're moving more to wind and solar, you know, can we get the battery storage so that when we don't have the wind at night, when we don't have the sun, do we have adequate battery storage to go through? I understand that's probably some of that is a technology issue that's still being addressed, but we need to know where that's going from. There was a pretty positive article in Express News about a week or so ago about the nuclear technology and being able to do the smaller nuclear plants and that sort of thing. Of course, at the end of it, it was, you know, the issue of disposable of nuclear waste is still an issue that needs to be addressed. And then there was something came out today about construction of solar panels is going to be reduced quite a bit next year because of the cost, and there's folks that are backing away from investments in solar panels. So that's concerning. So all of those types of issues, you know, I'm kind of curious from the CPS perspective, what are they concerned about, and what are we needing to possibly readjust, you know, where we're going in the plan over the next few years. So, you know, and everything, the bottom line, I think the average consumer is saying is, you know, is there a way that we can move toward a system where we don't have these messages from ERCOT twice a week, every summer?
You know, it's a little bit,
Yeah.
you know, frankly, I think it's kind of unnerving. I think all of us that lived here during Winter Storm Uri and sat for 4 days with no heater, you know, that you don't forget that real quickly now. So new people coming into Texas, some of our California evacuees and so forth may not have that history in their mind, but for most of us,
they're out there. They're used to blackouts and brownouts.
Well,
we're not.
Yeah, that's true.
But we don't want to get there.
But you know, that's kind of in the back of our mind, and when you have all these ERCOT requests for conservation, it's a little bit unnerving. I think, at least it was a little bit to me. I guess I got they call kind of burnout over it after a while. After you start getting them every day, you're like, okay, whatever. Anyway, I think if we could, maybe it's time to see Benny could maybe come back and visit with us and maybe talk about the transmission line issues.
Absolutely.
As I understood it, it was primarily, it's in South Texas, not primarily in the CPS area, but I'm sure Benny could, you know, give us the details.
It might be a combination conversation with Richard Medina, who's transmission, distribution, everything that need this power. So we can.
Who?
Have y'all heard from Elena Ball, our new Chief Strategy Officer?
No.
She's addressing a lot of the issues that you're raising from a global standpoint, so it might be good to get her in
I just
as well.
mentioned Benny just because we've
No, I-
heard from him before, but if there's other more appropriate
This-
people, that's fine too.
Definitely lives in the ESMO house, but we are looking at it from a strategic perspective, so I think that might be a good combo. I always feel like the explanations you get from ERCOT are all factually accurate for that moment, but sometimes not as illuminating as it could be if you were talking about it globally, because to me, some of the transmission issues that we had over the last couple of weeks are serious, and they say, oh, it's transmission constraints in the south. Well, it happened to be, that's factually accurate. It was transmission constraints in the south. I would argue that a fuller answer would be because a lot of the wind in Texas comes out of the south, and there was a need to rely on that wind at the particular peak periods of the 2 weeks that we just experienced. That's why there were issues in the transmission. We did see a phenomenon that you don't see a whole lot, and that was all of the wind dropped off at the exact same time. That does not happen a lot, and that creates some frequency issues on those same transmission lines. So it's not as simple as we just don't have enough transmission lines in the
Almost a
south.
data aliasing.
Yeah.
So just to complement that, right? I think that's a very important issue. I think that's a great suggestion to get the chief strategy officer. But John, I think also I'd like to get an update from Nancy. You're Nancy, right? I'm sorry. But you know, I thought her presentation a few months ago was fantastic, right? And having another instance of, did I have the wrong person?
No.
Laura Jacobs.
Laura, I'm so sorry about that. Laura.
You could have called her way worse things. That was a compliment, Laura. Laura is fantastic.
But her presentation was fantastic because it
really good.
provided that customer input, right? That we don't get, and it gets a holistic view. I think that has got to be on a quarterly basis, right?
Yeah, I
And
think
so I think it's time.
we need to
have
balance
that.
the technical information and the
Because I mean, that's our purpose, right?
resident.
And the
I
work
mean,
that
as
the-
interesting as the
Absolutely.
engineering stuff is, as interesting as the capacity and all this stuff, right? That's our job.
And the information that Laura shared with you a couple of months ago, all of
So
the
sorry.
work. Well, actually, Nancy has a connection to that because she used to work in the Peel area, but
No.
all of the programs, the customer programs, and all the assistance that has been the focus of that team is the reason why you have a positive story on the receivables and quotas program. All of that work.
But I mean, it's the spectrum of opinion that we're looking for, right? So we're not looking, okay, you know, here's all the praise for CPS, right? I don't care about the praise for, I want to know what the opinion is in San Antonio of CPS, right? Good, bad, and the ugly.
All right, I think time is asking us to move on. So, seems like we always have more to talk about than we have time to talk about. So
If you're ready, Chair Kelly, we can move to
Need to
executive
make
session where there will be no
executive
votes taken, no decisions made.
Right. So I think that's the time to do that. Do we need to
Yes,
do
we're gonna
something
stop
with
the
the
recording.
technology? Okay.
1 second. Be a second.